Recollections of Christ's Hospital by Charles Lamb. 1813, text of 1818. To comfort the desponding parent with the thought that, without diminishing the stock which is imperiously demanded to furnish the more pressing and homely wants of our nature, he has disposed of one or more perhaps out of a numerous offspring, under the shelter of a care scarce less tender than the paternal, where not only their bodily cravings shall be supplied, but that mental pabulum is also dispensed, which he hath declared to be no less necessary to our sustenance, who said, that not by bread alone man can live. For this Christ's hospital unfolds her bounty. Here neither, on the one hand, are the youth lifted up above their family, which pg 163 we must suppose liberal though reduced, nor, on the other hand, are they liable to be depressed below its level by the mean habits and sentiments which a common charity school generates. It is, in a word, an institution to keep those who have yet held up their heads in the world from sinking, to keep alive the spirit of a decent household when poverty was in danger of crushing it, to assist those who are the most willing, but not always the most able to assist themselves, to separate a child from his family, season in order to render him back hereafter, with feelings and habits more congenial to it than he could even have attained by remaining at home in the bosom of it. It is a preserving and renovating principle, an antidote for the res angusta domi, when it presses, as it always does, most heavily upon the most ingenuous natures. This is Christ's hospital, and whether its character would be improved by confining its advantages to the very lowest of the people, let those judge who have witnessed the looks, the gestures, the behavior, the manner of their play with one another, their deportment towards strangers, the whole aspect and physiognomy of that vast assemblage of boys on the London foundation, who freshen and make alive again with their sports the else mouldering cloisters of the old grey friars, which strangers who have never witnessed, if they pass through Newgate Street, or by Smithfield, would do well to go a little out of their way to see. For the Christ's Hospital boy feels that he is no charity boy. He feels it in the antiquity and regality of the foundation to which he belongs, in the usage which he meets with at school, and the treatment he is accustomed to out of its bounds, in the respect, and even kindness, which his well-known garb never fails to procure him in the streets of the metropolis. He feels it in his education, in that measure of classical attainments, which every individual at that school, though not destined to a learned profession, has it in his power to procure, attainments which it would be worse than folly to put it in the reach of the laboring classes to acquire. He feels it in the numberless comforts, and even magnificences which surround him, in his old and awful cloisters, with their traditions, in his spacious schoolrooms, and in the well-ordered, airy, and lofty rooms where he sleeps, in his stately dining hall, hung round with pictures by Verrio, Lely, and pg 164 others, one of them surpassing in size and grandeur almost any other in the kingdom. 26 above all, in the very extent and magnitude of the body to which he belongs, and the consequent spirit, the intelligence and public conscience, which is the result of so many various yet wonderfully combining members. Compared with this last-named advantage, what is the stock of information? I do not here speak of book learning, but of that knowledge which boy receives from boy, the mass of collected opinions, the intelligence in common, among the few and narrow members of an ordinary boarding school. The Christ's Hospital, or Bluecoat boy, has a distinctive character of his own, as far removed from the abject qualities of a common charity boy as it is from the disgusting forwardness of a lad brought up at some other of the public schools. There is pride in it, accumulated from the circumstances which I have described as differencing him from the former, and there is a restraining modesty, from a sense of obligation and dependence, which must ever keep his deportment from assimilating to that of the latter. His very garb, as it is antique and venerable, feeds his self-respect. As it is a badge of dependence, it restrains the natural petulance of that age from breaking out into overt acts of insolence. This produces silence and a reserve before strangers, yet not that cowardly shyness which boys mute up at home will feel. He will speak up when spoken to, but the stranger must begin the conversation with him. Within his bounds he is all fire and play, but in the streets he steals along with all the self-concentration of a young monk. He is never known to mix with other boys. They are a sort of laity to him. All this proceeds, I have no doubt, from the continual consciousness which he carries about him of the difference of his dress from that of the rest of the world, with a modest jealousy over himself, lest, by over-hastily mixing with common and secular playfellows, he should commit the dignity of his cloth. Nor let anyone laugh at this, For, considering the propensity of the multitude, and especially of the small multitude, to ridicule anything unusual in dress, above all, where such peculiarity may be construed by malice into a PG 165 mark of disparagement, this reserve will appear to be nothing more than a wise instinct in the blue-coat boy. That it is neither pride nor rusticity, at least that it has none of the offensive qualities of either, a stranger may soon satisfy himself by putting a question to any of these boys. He may be sure of an answer couched in terms of plain civility, neither loquacious nor embarrassed. Let him put the same question to a parish boy, or to one of the trencher caps in the cloisters, and the impudent reply of the one shall not fail to exasperate any more than the certain servility and mercenary eye to reward, which he will meet with in the other, can fail to depress and sadden him. The Christ's Hospital boy is a religious character. His school is eminently a religious foundation. It has its peculiar prayers, its services at set times, its graces, hymns, and anthems, following each other in an almost monastic closeness of succession. This religious character in him is not always untinged with superstition. That is not wonderful, when we consider the thousand tales and traditions which must circulate, with undisturbed credulity, amongst so many boys, that have so few checks to their belief from any intercourse with the world at large, upon whom their equals in age must work so much, their elders so little. With this leaning towards an overbelief in matters of religion, which will soon correct itself when he comes out into society, may be classed a turn for romance above most other boys. This is to be traced in the same manner to their excess of society with each other, and defect of mingling with the world. Hence the peculiar avidity with which such books as the Arabian Nights Entertainments, and others of a still wilder cast, are, or at least were in my time, sought for by the boys. I remember when some half-dozen of them set off from school, without map, card, or compass, on a serious expedition to find out Philip Quarlell's island. The Christ's Hospital boy's sense of right and wrong is peculiarly tender and apprehensive. It is even apt to run out into ceremonial observances, and to impose a yoke upon itself, beyond the strict obligations of the moral law. Those who were contemporaries with me at that school 30 years ago will remember with what more than Judaic rigor the eating of the fat of certain boiled meats 27 was interdicted. PG 166, a boy would have blushed, as at the exposure of some heinous immorality, to have been detected eating that forbidden portion of his allowance of animal food, the whole of which, while he was in health, was little more than sufficient to allay his hunger. The same, or even greater, refinement was shewn in the rejection of certain kinds of sweet cake. What gave rise to these supererogatory penances, these self-denying ordinances, I could never learn. 28. They certainly argue no defect of the conscientious principle. A little excess in that article is not undesirable in youth, to make allowance for the inevitable waste which comes in maturer years. But in the less ambiguous line of duty, in those directions of the moral feelings which cannot be mistaken or depreciated, I will relate what took place in the year 1785, when Mr. Perry, the steward, died. I must be pardoned for taking my instances from my own times. Indeed, the vividness of my recollections, while I am upon this subject, almost brings back those times. They are present to me still. But I believe that in the years which have elapsed since the period which I speak of, the character of the Christ's Hospital boy is very little changed. Their situation in point of many comforts is improved, but that which I ventured before to term the public conscience of the school, the pervading moral sense, of which every mind partakes, and to which so many individual minds contribute, remains, I believe, pretty much the same as when I left it. I have seen within this 12-month almost the change which has been produced upon a boy of 8 or 9 years of age, upon being admitted into that school. How, from a pert young coxcomb, who thought that all knowledge was comprehended within his shallow brains, because a smattering of 2 or 3 languages and 1 or 2 sciences were stuffed into him by injudicious treatment at home, by a mixture with the wholesome society of so PG 167 many schoolfellows, in less time than I have spoken of, he has sunk to his own level, and is contented to be carried on in the quiet orb of modest self-knowledge, in which the common mass of that unpresumptuous assemblage of boys seem to move. From being a little unfeeling mortal, he has got to feel and reflect. Nor would it be a difficult matter to show how, at a school like this, where the boy is neither entirely separated from home, nor yet exclusively under its influence, the best feelings, the filial for instance, are brought to a maturity which they could not have attained under a completely domestic education. How the relation of parent is rendered less tender by unremitted association, and the very awfulness of age is best apprehended by some sojourning amidst the comparative levity of youth. How absence, not drawn out by too great extension into alienation or forgetfulness, puts an edge upon the relish of occasional intercourse, and the boy is made the better child by that which keeps the force of that relation from being felt as perpetually pressing on him. How the substituted paternity, into the care of which he is adopted, while in everything substantial it makes up for the natural, in the necessary omission of individual fondnesses and partialities, directs the mind only the more strongly to appreciate that natural and first tie, in which such weaknesses are the bond of strength, and the appetite which craves after them betrays no perverse palate. But these speculations rather belong to the question of the comparative advantages of a public over a private education in general. I must get back to my favorite school, and to that which took place when our old and good steward died, a Mr. Hathaway. And I will say that when I think of the frequent instances which I have met with in children, of a hard-heartedness, a callousness, and insensibility to the loss of relations, even of those who have begot and nourished them, I cannot but consider it as a proof of something in the peculiar conformation of that school, favorable to the expansion of the best feelings of our nature, that, at the period which I am noticing, out of 500 boys there was not a dry eye to be found among them, nor a heart that did not beat with genuine emotion. Every impulse to play, until the funeral day was past, seemed suspended throughout the school, and the boys, lately so mirthful and sprightly, were seen pacing their cloisters pg 168 alone, or in sad groups standing about, few of them without some token, such as their slender means could provide, a black riband or something to denote respect and a sense of their loss. The time itself was a time of anarchy, a time in which all authority out of school hours was abandoned. The ordinary restraints were for those days superseded, and the gates, which at other times kept us in, were left without watchers. Yet with the exception of one or two graceless boys at most, who took advantage of that suspension of authority to skulk out, as it was called, the whole body of that great school kept rigorously within their bounds, by a voluntary self-imprisonment. And they who broke bounds, though they escaped punishment from any master, fell into a general disrepute among us, and for that which at any other time would have been applauded and admired, as a mark of spirit, were consigned to infamy and reprobation. So much natural government have gratitude and the principles of reverence and love, and so much did a respect to their dead friend prevail with these Christ's hospital boys above any fear which his presence among them when living could ever produce. And if the impressions which were made on my mind so long ago are to be trusted, very richly did their steward deserve this tribute. It is a pleasure to me even now to call to mind his portly form, the regal awe which he always contrived to inspire, in spite of a tenderness, and even weakness of nature, that would have enfeebled the reins of discipline in any other master. A yearning of tenderness towards those under his protection, which could make 500 boys at once feel towards him each as to their individual father. He had faults with which we had nothing to do, but with all his faults indeed, Mr. Perry was a most extraordinary creature. Contemporary with him, and still living, though he has long since resigned his occupation, will it be impertinent to mention the name of our excellent upper grammar master, the Rev. James Boyer. He was a disciplinarian, indeed, of a different stamp from him, whom I have just described. But now the terrors of the rod, and of a temper a little too hasty to leave the more nervous of us quite at our ease to do justice to his merits in those days, are long since over. Ungrateful were we if we should refuse our testimony to that unwearied assiduity with which he attended to the particular improvement of each of us. Had we been the offspring of the first gentry in the land, pg 169, he could not have been instigated by the strongest views of recompense and reward to have made himself a greater slave to the most laborious of all occupations than he did for us sons of charity, from whom, or from our parents, he could expect nothing. He has had his reward in the satisfaction of having discharged his duty, in the pleasurable consciousness of having advanced the respectability of that institution to which, both man and boy, he was attached, in the honors to which so many of his pupils have successfully aspired at both our universities, and in the staff with which the governors of the hospital at the close of his hard labors, with the highest expressions of the obligations the school lay under to him, unanimously voted to present him. I have often considered it among the felicities of the constitution of this school that the offices of steward and schoolmaster are kept distinct. the strict business of education alone devolving upon the latter, while the former has the charge of all things out of school, the control of the provisions, the regulation of meals, of dress, of play, and the ordinary intercourse of the boys. By this division of management, a superior respectability must attach to the teacher, while his office is unmixed with any of these lower concerns. A still greater advantage over the construction of common boarding schools is to be found in the settled salaries of the masters, rendering them totally free of obligation to any individual pupil or his parents. This never fails to have its effect at schools where each boy can reckon up to a hair what profit the master derives from him, where he views him every day in the light of a caterer, a provider for the family, who is to get so much by him in each of his meals. Boys will see and consider these things, and how much must the sacred character of preceptor suffer in their minds by these degrading associations. The very bill which the pupil carries home with him at Christmas, eked out, perhaps, with elaborate though necessary minuteness, instructs him that his teachers have other ends than the mere love to learning in the lessons which they give him, and though they put into his hands the fine sayings of Seneca or Epictetus, yet they themselves are none of those disinterested pedagogues to teach philosophy gratis. The master, too, is sensible that he is seen in this light, and how much this must lessen that affectionate regard to the learners, which alone can sweeten the bitter labor of PG 170 instruction, and convert the whole business into unwelcome and uninteresting taskwork. Many preceptors that I have conversed with on the subject are ready, with a sad heart, to acknowledge. From this inconvenience, the settled salaries of the masters of this school in great measure exempt them, while the happy custom of choosing masters, indeed every officer of the establishment, from those who have received their education there, gives them an interest in advancing the character of the school, and binds them to observe a tenderness and a respect to the children, in which a stranger, feeling that independence which I have spoken of, might well be expected to fail. In affectionate recollections of the place where he was bred up, in hearty recognitions of old schoolfellows met with again after the lapse of years, or in foreign countries, the Christ's hospital boy yields to none. I might almost say, he goes beyond most other boys. The very compass and magnitude of the school, its thousand bearings, the space it takes up in the imagination beyond the ordinary schools, impresses a remembrance, accompanied with an elevation of mind, that attends him through life. It is too big, too affecting an object, to pass away quickly from his mind. The Christ's hospital boys' friends at school are commonly his intimates through life. For me, I do not know whether a constitutional imbecility does not incline me too obstinately to cling to the remembrances of childhood. In an inverted ratio to the usual sentiments of mankind, nothing that I have been engaged in since seems of any value or importance, compared to the colors which imagination gave to everything then. I belong to no body corporate such as I then made a part of. And here, before I close, taking leave of the general reader, and addressing myself solely to my old school fellows, that were contemporaries with me from the year 1782 to 1789, let me have leave to remember some of those circumstances of our school, which they will not be unwilling to have brought back to their minds. And first, let us remember, as first in importance in our childish eyes, the young men as they almost were, who, under the denomination of Grecians, were waiting the expiration of the period when they should be sent, at the charges of the hospital, to one or other of our universities, but more frequently to Cambridge. These youths, from their superior PG 171 acquirements, their superior age and stature, and the fewness of their numbers, for seldom above 2 or 3 at a time were inaugurated into that high order, drew the eyes of all, and especially of the younger boys, into a reverent observance and admiration. How tall they used to seem to us! How stately would they pace along the cloisters, while the play of the lesser boys was absolutely suspended, or its boisterousness at least allayed, at their presence. Not that they ever beat or struck the boys, that would have been to have demeaned themselves. The dignity of their persons alone ensured them all respect. The task of blows, of corporal chastisement, they left to the common monitors, or heads of wards, who, it must be confessed, in our time had rather too much license allowed them to oppress and misuse their inferiors. And the interference of the Grecian, who may be considered as the spiritual power, was not unfrequently called for, to mitigate by its mediation the heavy unrelenting arm of this temporal power, or monitor. In fine, the Grecians were the solemn muftis of the school. Raws were computed from their time. It used to be said, such or such a thing was done when S, or T, was Grecian. As I ventured to call the Grecians the muftis of the school, the king's boys, 29 as their character then was, may well pass for the janissaries. They were the terror of all the other boys, bred up under that hardy sailor, as well as excellent mathematician and co-navigator with Captain Cook, William Wales. All his systems were adapted to fit them for the rough element which they were destined to encounter. Frequent and severe punishments, which were expected to be borne with more than Spartan fortitude, came to be considered less as inflictions of disgrace than as trials of obstinate endurance. To make his boys hardy, and to give them early sailor habits, seemed to be his only aim. To this everything was subordinate. Moral obliquities, indeed, were sure of receiving their full recompense, for no occasion of laying on the lash was ever let slip, but the effects expected to be produced from it were something very different from contrition or mortification. There was in William Wales a perpetual fund of humor, a constant glee about him, which, pg 172 heightened by an inveterate provincialism of North Country dialect, absolutely took away the sting from his severities. His punishments were a game at patience, in which the master was not always worst contented when he found himself at times overcome by his pupil. What success this discipline had, or how the effects of it operated upon the afterlives of these king's boys, I cannot say, but I am sure that, for the time, they were absolute nuisances to the rest of the school. Hardy, brutal, and often wicked, they were the most graceless lump in the whole mass, older and bigger than the other boys. For, by the system of their education they were kept longer at school by 2 or 3 years than any of the rest, except the Grecians. They were a constant terror to the younger part of the school. And some who may read this, I doubt not, will remember the consternation into which the juvenile fry of us were thrown, when the cry was raised in the cloisters, that the first order was coming, for so they termed the first form or class of those boys. Still these sea boys answered some good purposes in the school. They were the military class among the boys, foremost in athletic exercises, who extended the fame of the prowess of the school far and near, and the apprentices in the vicinage, and sometimes the butcher's boys in the neighboring market, had sad occasion to attest their valor. The time would fail me if I were to attempt to enumerate all those circumstances, some pleasant, some attended with some pain, which, seen through the mist of distance, comes sweetly softened to the memory. But I must crave leave to remember our transcending superiority in those invigorating sports, leapfrog and basting the bear. Our delightful excursions in the summer holidays to the New River, near Newington, where, like otters, we would live the long day in the water, never caring for dressing ourselves when we had once stripped. Our savory meals afterwards, when we came home almost famished with staying out all day without our dinners. Our visits at other times to the Tower, where, by antient privilege, we had free access to all the curiosities. Our solemn processions through the city at Easter, with the Lord Mayor's largesse of buns, wine, and a shilling, with the festive questions and civic pleasantries of the dispensing aldermen, which were more to us than all the rest of the banquet, our stately suppings in public, pg 173 where the well-lighted hall, and the confluence of well-dressed company who came to see us, made the whole look more like a concert or assembly than a scene of a plain bread and cheese collation. The annual orations upon St. Matthew's Day, in which the senior scholar, before he had done, seldom failed to reckon up, among those who had done honor to our school by being educated in it, the names of those accomplished critics and Greek scholars, Joshua Barnes and Jeremiah Markland. I marvel they left out Camden while they were about it. Let me have leave to remember our hymns and anthems, and well-toned organ, the doleful tune of the burial anthem chanted in the solemn cloisters, upon the seldom occurring funeral of some schoolfellow, the festivities at Christmas, when the richest of us would club our stock to have a gaudy day, sitting round the fire, replenished to the height with logs, and the penniless, and he that could contribute nothing, partook in all the mirth, and, in some of the substantialities of the feasting, the carols sung by night at that time of the year, which, when a young boy, I have so often lain awake to hear from 7, the hour of going to bed, till 10, when it was sung by the older boys and monitors, and have listened to it, in their rude chanting, till I have been transported in fancy to the fields of Bethlehem, and the song which was sung at that season by angels' voices to the shepherds. Nor would I willingly forget any of those things, which administered to our vanity, the hem-stitched bands and town-made shirts which some of the most fashionable among us wore, the town girdles with buckles of silver or shining stone, the badges of the sea boys, the cots or superior shoestrings of the monitors, the medals of the markers, those who were appointed to hear the Bible read in the wards on Sunday morning and evening, which bore on their obverse in silver, as certain parts of our garments carried in meaner metal the countenance of our founder, that godly and royal child, King Edward VI, the flower of the Tudor name, the young flower that was untimely cropped as it began to fill our land with its early odors, the boy patron of boys, the serious and holy child who walked with Cranmer and Ridley, fit associate in those tender years for the bishops and future martyrs of our church to receive, or as occasion sometimes proved, to give instruction. pg 174.